Assalamu alaikum dear viewers. I hope you all will be doing good. Today we will be discussing a very important topic of international relations. This is rather one of the most important topics of international relations, which is known as the national interests. Now, what does the national interest mean? The national interest, they are, all nations are always engaged in the process of fulfilling or securing the goals of their national interest. So, national interests are always pursued. If you can put it in other words, that it would be that national interests are always pursued by the nation. The foreign policy of each nation is formulated on the basis of its national interest, and it is always at work for securing its goals. So this just shows the importance of the national interest, that the foreign policy revolves around your national interest. This is the pivot around which your foreign policy revolves. That is why it is called one of the most important topics of international relations. Now, national interests are universally accepted right of each state. So no state can ask another state that you should not pursue your national interest, because this is a universally accepted right of each state. Again, states always try to justify its action on the basis of the national interest. Whatever states will be doing, you would see that the leaders would be telling you, or the leaders would be telling the masses, that they are just pursuing their national interest, and they would be telling the global population or the world populace that a particular state A, state B, or state C, they are pursuing their national interest, and there is no harm in doing so. Then the behavior of a state is always conditioned and governed by the national interest. Whatever behavior of a state you see in the international arena or on the international stage, it is governed by the national interest of that particular state. Therefore, we call it really essential in international relations. Whatever happens in international relations revolves around the national interest of different nations. All these relations, see the conflict, see the cooperation, they would be governed by the national interest. Why there is conflict in Syria, why there is conflict in the Middle East, why there is cooperation in the EU and in the North, in the countries across the North Atlantic, why this cooperation is there, why these conflicts are there? Because states are pursuing their national interests, and at times these national interests, the conglomerate of the national interest, might converge into cooperation, and at times it would display itself in conflict, which we see. According to Hans J. Morgenthau, the meaning of the national interest is survival, the protection of the physical, political, cultural identity against encroachment by other nations. This is what he thinks that the national interest is. But there is, the meaning or the nature of this national interest, it is quite vague and ambiguous. It cannot be definite. You cannot say that, okay, I have come up with this definition of the national interest and this is a very clear definition. It is quite vague concept. That is why we will be pondering over different aspects of this national interest. For example, what happens? That the statesmen and policymakers have always used it in ways suitable to them and to their objectives of justifying the actions of their states. That is why this national interest is misused as well. You might call it that this is a misuse of national interest, the slogan or the term of the national interest. But the politicians, the statesmen, they use it to serve the purpose, to serve their purposes. It might be to serve the purpose of their nation at the expense of the interest of other nations as well. You can see it. For example, what happens? Hitler justified expansionist policies in the name of German national interests. So you can see that, he used it negatively, but he justified it because it was an intrinsic right of all states that they can pursue their national interests. So whenever a state says that these are my national interests, I'm going after them. So then other states cannot stop it, because this state, we will be, I'll be elaborating this point later on, that how these national interests are pursued, what are the means to achieve these national interests. Then the US presidents have always justified their decisions to go to war or for development, and they just talk about their national interest, that they are developing more lethal weapons just for their national interest, for their national security, because they say that this is in the US national interest that they are doing it. So these nuclear bombs, these conflict around the world in which the lethal war technology or destructive technology of the US war machine is used, it is used in the name of the US national interest. So that is why I was telling you that this national interest is misused as well over at times. Then another example is, the USSR, the United States of America has a nuclear base in Diego Garcia. It's an island in the Pacific. It has a nuclear base in Diego Garcia, and it was initially established just to avert the threat of the then USSR or the erstwhile USSR. So this was done in the name of the national interest, that nuclear base was established over there in Diego Garcia. Then in 1978-79, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in the name of its national interest. So that is why this national interest is really important. Now again, take the example of China, its border dispute with India in the past, and the current one as well, this face-off of India and China. It is in the name of the national interest of China, because right now China thinks that India is advancing in that region just to keep an eye on the CPEC, which is vital for the economic development of not only Pakistan but particularly China, and that is why China cannot allow that. So the best way to do that is to proceed to move forward in that conflict zone and cross the line of actual control, move into Indian territory, Indian side of the line of actual control, and then justify it as the national interest of China. So this thing is used. Then again, the permanent 5 countries in the United Nations, they talk about the non-proliferations, the non-proliferation, and then the arms control and the disarmament on international stage in the national interest of many countries of the committee of international committee. So that can be used in different ways. There can be many examples which I can quote. It can take me quite some time, like for half an hour I can quote you examples, but this is not the point over here. The point is to make you understand what is national interest. These examples were just to lay the foundation, to let you know that what is a national interest. Okay, the ambiguity that hinders the process of formulating a universally accepted definition of the national interest, because there is ambiguity in this process and it hinders coming up with a universally accepted definition of the national interest. Therefore, there are various definitions of national interest. We will be going through some of the major definitions. We cannot go through all the definitions of national interest, but I'll be going through some of the major definitions of the national interest, and then you will come to know that what a national interest is all about. For example, there is one definition that national interest is what a nation feels to be necessary to its security and well-being. National interest reflects the general and continuing ends of which a nation ends for which a nation acts. This is the Brookings Institution's definition of the national interest. Then another definition is the national interest, the general, long-term and continuing purpose which the state, the nation and the government all see themselves as serving. So this is another definition. Then there is another definition that national interest is that which states seek to protect or achieve in relation to each other. It means desires on the part of the sovereign states. So national interests are basically the desires of the state, and they try to achieve, to materialize those desires, and these desires become national interest. So that is why I was telling you that, and then there is one definition of Hans J. Morgenthau, which I already told you that the meaning of the national interest is survival. So I've already talked about this definition, so that is one definition. Then there are many more definitions like this, and a lot of scholars, a lot of academicians, they have come up with different definitions. Then V.V. Dyke, he comes up with a definition that the national interest means the value, desires, and the interest which state seeks to protect or achieve in relations to other desires on the part of the sovereign states, which I have already discussed. So this is the definition of V.V. Dyke's. So this is he bases it purely on desires of the states, and this V.V. Dyke is quite important. He has elaborated many more aspects under this definition, which I'll be elaborating later on in this lecture. Okay, if now we conclude from all the above discussion that what does national interest do, or what are the things which it defines. So basically national interest defines the objectives, the goals, the demands and interest which nations always try to achieve, right? Objectives, goals, demands and interest, and they achieve it and they try to preserve, protect, defend and secure in international relations with other. So these national interests define the objectives, the goals and the demands, and then the states try to preserve those objectives, achieve those demands and protect and achieve those goals and defend those interests on international stage. So if you see, it is the national interest, as I have already told you, that the foreign policy revolves around the national interest. So national interest is the pivot around which the whole machinery of a state revolves in international sphere. So if I'll not be wrong if I say that the national interest or the conglomerate of the national interest is which formulates the international relations, right? Now there are components of the national interest. Now we are about to dissect this term, this national interest. What are the some of the components of this national interest? There can be twofold components. One are necessary or vital components, and the other are variable or non-vital components. Now, sorry. Now, what are necessary and vital components? Again, according to Hans J. Morgenthau, vital components of the national interest that the foreign policy seeks to secure are the survival or the identity, or the survival and the identity, you might call it. Then it is subdivided into this identity part is subdivided into three parts. Number one is the physical identity, number two is the political identity, and number three is the cultural identity. So you can see that this national interest and this identity, this identity problem, it is always aligned there with the national interest. Security and identity, or survival or identity, it is aligned with the national interest. Now, physical identity includes territorial identity. Political identity means politico-economic system. Physical is political identity. Physical includes territorial and the politico-economic system of international. You might call it an international stage, and then particularly in that particular nation. Then cultural identity stands for historical values that are upheld by a nation as part of its cultural heritage. So these things are very dear in the formulation of a national identity for a country, and that is why they are part and parcel of the national interest of a country. These are basically called the vital components. I'm sorry. A nation even can decide to go to war to secure these vital interests. So these are that much vital that nations can even go to war to secure these ideals. There can be various examples can be quoted in this regard, but one example which I would like to quote is from the Cold War, and that is that the Cold War, between the USSR, the erstwhile USSR, and the United States of America was revolving around these identities, right? On the one side there was socialism, on the other side there was communism. Though they could not, they did not wage a war with each other directly, but there were many fronts opened during those 45 years. You can talk about the Korean War, 1950s, the Vietnam War, the Afghan War. So all these war fronts or these war theaters were opened, and they were revolving around these identities. So this is the value of the national interest on international stage and for the international actors. That is why these are called the vital interest of the vital component of the national interest. Sorry. Then the foreign policy is always formulated to strengthen the security of states, as I have already shown you, survival and security. So the foreign policy is formulated to strengthen the security of these states. Then there are non-vital or variable components of the national interest. So these are those parts of the national interest which are determined either by the circumstances or by necessity of securing the vital components. You are securing the vital components and you are resorting to apply or to employ some variables or non-vital components, and then your vital components would be secured. Your vital components would not be secured by default. You need to do something about it, and then these whatever you are doing, whatever a state is doing, these formulate or these are known as the non-vital components. For example, these non-vital components are determined by a host of factors, but some of them are the decision makers. They determine the non-vital factors. Then the public opinion of a particular country, it determines the non-vital factors. Then the party politics within that particular country. For example, take the example of the United States of America. What are their variables or non-vital components? Their main ideals or the vital components are there, but then there is always a debate going on between the Democrats and between the Republicans about different policy options, and they usually debate on the non-vital components. They do not compromise on the vital components, but they have policy differences on how to reach or how to achieve those vital components. They debate on these things. So the larger goals or the vital components of the national interest or the which determine the national interest, they are the same. But these non-vital things, they are variables and they can be changed from time to time. Then different groups can determine some of the non-vital components of the variable components. So these are the non-vital components, and the variables. I'm sorry, I have sore throat today, so please forgive me for that. Okay. Then these variable interests are those desires of individual states which they would no doubt like to see fulfilled, but for which they will not go to war. These are such kind of desires for which individual states would like to fulfill, but for the vital they can go to war, but for these non-vital they will not go to war. They will just adopt these measures to achieve the vital components, and if one set of measures are failed, then they would resort to apply another set of measures, but they will not go for war to defend these non-vital components, because these are non-vital. The major purpose of these non-vital components is to achieve the vital components of the national interest. So I hope I have clarified this point, and if there is some problem, you can we will be discussing that during the question answer session in the class, inshallah. Okay. Then again, objectives have been, there are some objectives of, some of the objectives have been listed by V.V. Dyke. And what are these objectives? These objectives are prosperity. This is one of the objectives of the national interest, one of the objectives of the foreign policy, but the foreign policy is basically determined by the national interest, you might call. So prosperity, peace is another objective, ideology is another objective, then justice, prestige, aggrandizement and power. So these are some of the objectives which are basically then derived from these from these vital and non-vital components and this national interest. Then Thomas W. Robinson's classification of the national interest. This academician classified the national interest in 6 categories basically. So these 6 categories are quite important, and you might write them down by having a pen and paper with you right now, so it will be easy for you to reflect on these 6 fold classification of the national interest, which states try to secure. Number one is known as the primary interest. So what are the primary interest? These are those interests in respect of which no nation can compromise, right? Again, you can call it the vital, but now this is classification, so this is another dimension of looking towards the things. So no nation can compromise on these vital, on these primary interest. No nation can compromise, like, you know, I have already told you that they can go for war even. So on primary interest, nations can even wage war with each other, and what does it include? It includes the preservation of physical, political and cultural identity against possible encroachment by other states. So again, you know, this is another angle of looking towards the things, that the preservation of physical identity, the political identity, the cultural identity from any kind of encroachment by any international actor, because all international actors are equal sovereigns according to the norms of international law. They are equal sovereigns, so nobody can encroach on these things. So these are the primary interests. Then there are secondary interests. These, like the vital and non-vital, these secondary interests are vital for the existence of the state. They include protection of the citizens abroad, number one. If your citizens are not protected abroad and they are being attacked by other states just because they are the citizens of that particular state, it means that, you know, the secondary interests of the states are not served, and this state is not looked upon with respect in the international community. So this is the first objective, or this vital, this is vital for your existence, that your citizens abroad should be protected. And then diplomatic immunities for the diplomatic staff should also be there, because I'll be discussing this in this lecture and then in the following lectures as well, that diplomatic immunities are really important, because through diplomacy you are basically carrying out international relations, carrying it forward. And why do you carry it forward? Because you want to achieve your national interest, your vital interest. So if these secondary interests are not served, then the national interest would not be achieved. That is why it is really important. Again, then there are permanent interests. So these refer to relatively constant long-term interest of the states. That is why we call them permanent interest. Now, why permanent interest? What are the examples of permanent interest? For example, the United States of America wants to preserve its influence in the international waters, in the international oceans. So they would call it that this is our permanent interest, and that is why they are there in the South China Sea. There is the monopoly of the United States of America in the Pacific Ocean, and particularly in the South China Sea, because they want to control all these waterways through which trade would be done with the rest of the world, and they just want to monitor these waterways just to keep pressure on different regional and now you might call it international powers. China is one of them. China is that international power right now. And China is now pushing the United States of America back in the South China Sea, because now China has emerged as an economic giant, as an undisputed economic power, and now it is flexing its muscles to show the world that it is a military power as well. So that is why these are the permanent interests, and these interests were there in the whole of the Cold War and in the post-Cold War. And now at the beginning of the new Cold War, or the Cold War 2.0, as some of the analysts call it, with China of the United States of America. If you are interested, I have uploaded a few videos about this new Cold War in Urdu. You can go to my channel, and the playlist name is Academics, and then you can watch that whole series of lectures. That is about a 3 lectures series. So this new Cold War phenomenon has been explained over there with China. So that is the permanent interest of the United States of America. But now these permanent interests are kind of what you would call it threatened, or they are kind of pushed back, or they are forced to be changed right now by the growing military power of China as well. Then there are variable interests. Number 4 is a variable interest. So they are considered vital for the national good in a given set of circumstances. Now, in this sense, these can diverge from both primary and permanent interest. The variable interests are largely determined by cross currents of personalities, public opinions, public opinion makers or public opinion, sectional interest, partisan politics, and political and moral undercurrents, whatever are going on in that particular society. So these variable interests, as I have told you, that the variable means changing in nature, not permanent. The other one was permanent, but these are variable. So they can be changed, like personalities there are a clash of personalities. One is, a foolhardy kind of leadership has emerged in country A, and then is a foolhardy kind of leadership in country B, and both are big powers as well. So then they are compelled to think about some of their variable interest, and they can change it. So they are influenced by these personalities, cross currents of personalities, and then the public opinion in different countries can also change them, these variable interests. And then, like for example, one of the variable interests was the presence of American troops in Afghanistan, and this variable interest can be changed by the public opinion in the United States of America. And these public opinions are basically made by different opinion makers, but again they can be changed. But nobody can talk about changing the permanent US interest that soon, unless and until US is quite weakened, which is the chances of which are quite bleak, which I don't see in the near future. But still, there is a challenger there on the world stage, and we will see what happens in the coming years and decades. Okay, so these are changed. Then the general interest, then number 5th is the general interest. General interest of a nation refers to those positive conditions which apply to a large number of nations or several specific fields such as economic, trade, diplomatic relations. So these are general interest. Then to maintain international peace is a general interest of all states or all nations. Similar is the case of disarmaments and arm controls or free trade under the WTO rules. So these are the general interest, and these general interests are not specifically interests of one country. They are interests of different countries, and these different countries, the conglomeration of these general interests make of these national interests, the conglomeration or the convergence of these different national interests of different states make a general interest, or make general interest. So that is why we call them general interest. Then again, category number 6 is specific interest, or classification number 6 is the specific interest. So these specific interests are the logical outgrowth of the general interest, and these are defined in terms of time and space. Like the specific interest might be specific for a particular time, but they might not be interest after 10 years or after 20 years or after a few decades. These might not be called specific interests. They are specific to time and space. That is why they are called specific interest. Now, to secure the economic rights of the third world countries, example of the specific interest is that to secure the economic rights of the third world countries, there was a debate in international relations that international economic order, and then there was a new international economic order presented. So it was presented by India. India was leading these developing countries, and it was telling the developed countries that we are securing the specific interest of the developed countries. So now this example is clear that specific interest, this is the outgrowth of the of those permanent interests, but these are the general interest. But these specific like for example in the general interest, they came up and they gave this international economic order. But then, since all the Committee of Nations was agreeing upon those international economic order, the terms of those international economic orders, but then later on they realized, the developing countries, which India was leading them, then they realized that okay, the purposes or the interest of the developed countries are served with this international economic order, but this does not serve the purpose of the underdeveloped or the developing countries. So they came up with a new international economic order in which they asked for the transfer of technology to the developing countries as well. So that is why these are called specific interest, and they are limited to time and space. Now India has also developed quite industrially, I'm talking about. Economically they are a big power, and industrially they have set up many industries in their country. So India is also growing, and that is why we cannot call it as a specific interest right now. That interest has been achieved by India successfully, I guess. Then another example of this specific interest is, recently you might have noticed that due to the COVID-19 scenario in the world, Pakistan appealed to the international community to give a waiver to the developing countries in their loans and defer their payment of loans for a foreseeable future, so that these countries can cope with the outbreak effectively. So now Pakistan was leading the developing and the underdeveloped countries in this regard, and you might call it specific interest. Pakistan was representing these specific interests, and then they agreed to those demands of Pakistan at that time. And now you can see that today is recording it is 11th of June, and the time is 2 p.m. right now, at 2 a.m. not 2 p.m. sorry. So it is 11th of June, and about a few hours ago, when I was reading a piece of news, I came to know that previously Pakistan was not in that concessional list which G20 had approved, but then Pakistan applied for that concession as well. The G20 basically approved the demand of Pakistan, and then they issued a list of countries which they announced that these countries would be eligible for that deferment of loans for a specific time, for a year or two, I guess, for June 2021. Up till June 2021, these countries would not be asked to pay the installments of their loans. So Pakistan's name was not there, but then Pakistan also applied. And today I read in the news that the name of Pakistan has also been included in those countries to which this waiver have been given by the G20 countries. And since this is not a current affairs vlog right now, this is just a lecture, so I will not be going into detail, but in my vlogs I'll be talking about this aspect as well, about the economy of Pakistan. So this is an example of the specific interest. Now T.W. Robinson's views about international interest. Now, these are, classification of the national interest, but then there's T.W. Robinson's view is of international interest as well. So, how does he see international interest? There are again, he refers to three international interests. Number one is identical interest, number two is complementary interest, and number three is conflicting interest. So, in identical interest, he includes those interests which are common to the large number of states. So, the interest of one country is identical to the interest of country B, and then country C, then country D, country E, country F, you can go on, So, a large number of countries, these interests are common for a large number of countries, or to a large number of countries, these interests are common. That is why this is identical interest. This is international, the classification of international interest is, or his view about international interest is that these are identical interests. Then complementary interest refers to those interests which are not identical, and they can form the basis of agreement on some specific issues. So there are, complementary, like they are complementing something. So these are some of the issues on which we call complementary, and they are not identical. But since there are identical interests, and then there are some other interests, the requirement of state A to achieve those identical interests, like for example, the achievement of economic prosperity you just take the example of achievement of economic prosperity as the identical interest of many states. But then how to achieve this economic prosperity by state A? So the conditions of state A would define the complementary interest of state A to achieve that identical interest, which is identical to, let's say, with 100 nations. But over here in this country, there is poverty. So first of all, poverty is one of the causes poverty is one of the reasons due to which they try to achieve these identical interests. But for example, in this country, the people are less educated in country A. So the complementary interest of country A would be to invest on the education so that the people are educated, and then they go and achieve this identical interest of theirs. And then in country B, it would not be the matter of education, it would be the matter of lack of technology. People would be educated, but they would not be equipped with technology. So they would be striving to achieve or to acquire technology. The main power would be with them, but they would be striving to acquire technology. Take the example of Iran in this regard. Iran's national interests are identical, international interests are identical to do efforts of poverty alleviation in Iran. But then the Iranian nation is an educated nation. They have their own nuclear program and everything. But now they just want the international community to lift sanctions from Iran so that they can acquire the required technology from the international community. So this is the complementary interest of Iran, which is not identical with Pakistan. The complementary interest of Pakistan is something else, and the complementary interest of Afghanistan is something else. Afghanistan has got the problem of lack of education or illiteracy, and then it has got the problem of health issues as well as the average age bracket in Afghanistan is 40 to 45 years. So there is that health issue prevailing over there in Afghanistan as well. And then you can see the example of Japan, like the economic interests are there with Japan, but in Japan the young population, the ratio of the young population is not encouraging, and their population, they have a burgeoning old population, and they will have to take care of this burgeoning old population. So they will have to focus on something else. So these are all complementary interests which are complementing to the identical interests. I hope I have made my point clear, and if not, you can ask me in the question answer session in the class. Then there are conflicting interests, which includes those interests which are neither complementary and nor identical. They are at times conflicting, but these conflicting might become, what happens as these are not absolute classifications. So if this classification is not absolute, so the complementary might become identical, because if the complementary components in, let's say there are identical components in 100 states, and among those 100 states the complementary components within 70 states are again identical. So what happens? That these complementary becomes these complementary interest or complementary classification becomes identical again among that particular state. So these are variables, they keep on changing, and likewise these conflicting interests again become, you know, complementary. So if, for example, if state A wants to strive for the achievement of 100% literacy rate, and that is why it is focusing on that, so it might be not a priority right now for state B, and the developed country would have given it a specific share in their economic or financial aid programs. The developed countries or the international financial institutions would have given it, and the needs of another country or another set of countries, the complementary needs of another set of countries, or since they are not the complementary, the conflicting interest of other countries would have been ignored. But later on they would realize that, okay, these are also some of the important aspects, we have ignored them for quite a long time, and now we should, since this conflicting purpose has been served, now we should invest on the other as well. So with these categories keep on changing, so it is not flexible, it is not rigid, it is quite flexible. I hope I have made my point quite clear. Okay, again this six-fold classificatory scheme offered by T.W. Robinson can be of great help for all of the members of the international community, like states. This is of great help, because if you want to analyze the national interest, you just go to this classification, six-fold classification of the national interest by T.W. Robinson, and then you will come up with an idea about why states behave the way they are behaving, right? So you would come up with that idea. So this is one aspect. Now the issue has been somewhat summed up or completed about the debate over the national interest. So these goals and these objectives and everything has been defined, the classification of national interests, what are vital and non-vital interest or permanent, and everything has been discussed over here. You can go back in this lecture and you can watch but again there is a very pertinent question, and that pertinent question is that what are the means through which these national interest or the national interest is achieved by a state. So to secure the goals and objectives of a country, or to secure these goals and objectives, this is the paramount duty of each and every country to secure it, right? So nobody can object that why country A or why country B is up to securing its goals and objectives. This is a duty of a country, and it is the natural right of a country to go after its interest. So there is no harm in it. Therefore, nations are always at work in securing it. Like 24/7, you would see nations securing their national interest. Now, how do they do it? They adopt a number of methods for it, right? But there are a number of methods for it. I would be just discussing a few most important methods out of a variety of methods which states adopt or employ to achieve their national interest. Method number one, to achieve the national interest. That is diplomacy. These national interests are achieved through diplomacy. Now, what is diplomacy? Diplomacy is a universally accepted means. Diplomacy is it is the diplomatic missions, your embassies, your diplomatic staff, all these things. This is a very important organ of your foreign policy. Foreign policy of nations travels through diplomacy. I would say that the foreign policy of nation travels through diplomacy. If the arm of diplomacy is eliminated, then the foreign policy of the nations cannot travel in the international sphere, right? And then if it cannot travel, then it cannot achieve the national interest. So this is how you can think about diplomacy. Then what does diplomats do? They establish contacts with decision makers in other countries where they are stationed. Then they are constantly engaged in negotiations for achieving the desired goals or their national interests and objectives of their whatever their national interests are telling them. These objectives and these goals all are derived from the national interest. So basically they are constantly engaged in achieving these whenever they are serving their country abroad in other countries. And that national interest, a US diplomat working in Pakistan would be devising a certain set of means which would be specific for Pakistan, and a US diplomat serving in China would not be resorting to the same kind of techniques or tactics. He or she would be resorting to other sort of techniques or tactics because they need to deal with China in another fashion, but they need to deal with Pakistan in another way. So this is then the intellect of the diplomat which will dictate the actions of the diplomat, how to go about the goals or the short-term goals in that particular country, which would ultimately contribute to the long-term goals of the United States of America on the international stage. And it can be the example of any other country and its diplomatic missions across the world. You can just see, and the policies are not run uniformly. They are run from country to country. The larger goals are there, but the means which the diplomats adopt, they vary from country to country depending on the conditions of the host countries. All right, so this is then diplomats, they use persuasion, they use threats. Like in China, they would use persuasion. In Afghanistan and Pakistan, they were using threats constantly. The US diplomats, I'm talking about the US diplomats. So they use persuasion, they use threats, then they use the means of rewards, and then the threats of denial of something which the national interest, like for example, if the United States of America asked a weak country to do something which is in the national interest of the United States of America, and that weak country denies, then what does the United States of America do with that weak country, financially, economically weak country? What does it do? It just, puts some strict condition by the international financial institutions over that country, because that country A, country B or country C, which is a weak country comparatively, it does not agree to the demands of the United States of America in that particular country, to the demands which the diplomats would have put forward in front of the policy makers of that country, and they are not agreeing to those demands. So then they put financial sanctions or economic sanctions on that weak country, the United States of America, just because it is and now when they put economic sanctions on that particular country, it was in the interest of this weak country to achieve economic prosperity through economic or financial aid. So when it sees its economic interest at stake, it sees its national interest at stake, and then it agrees to the demands of the stronger country. This is how it works. And these diplomats are quite proactively doing these things, diplomats of every country. And the more your diplomacy is proactive, the more your country become prosperous. This is how it works. Then diplomatic negotiations constitute the most effective means of conflict resolutions as well. It is not only about different kind of carrot and stick. It is about conflict resolutions as well. Like there is a conflict between China and India right now. This conflict can only be resolved through diplomatic negotiations between China and India. So the first round of the flag meeting between commandants of Chinese and Indian military have been carried out, but then there are other rounds which are also to be carried out in the future. So the future rounds will also design or decide these, and diplomats would be involved at a certain level. You would see the visits of Indian foreign minister to China at a certain stage, and definitely the Chinese foreign ministry or the Chinese government would have been contacted by the Indian embassy in Beijing right now, up till now. But later on they will mature, and a high profile diplomatic mission from India would go to China, and then they will resolve these issues. Whatever these conflicts are between the two countries, they would come to common terms to resolve these issues. And I guess, like, my reflection on that is that right now China is an emerging superpower. It has almost, like in the post COVID-19 era, we would see China as one of the major powers on the world stage. So India is in the fold or in the block of the United States of America. It is constantly posing problems for China on CPEC on the one hand, and on for the Chinese trade in the Indian Oceans on the other hand. So right now China is asking through these gestures in Sikkim and Ladakh, China is pushing India to decide to come out from the shadows, from the silos, and come in the forefront and decide where does India stand in this new Cold War, which is about to be waged or to be started between the United States and China. So China is basically asking India by these postures that you should be very clear about your position. You should tell me clearly, where are you standing? Are you posing a threat to the CPEC? If this is the case, then I'm going to fix you. And are you posing a threat to me in the international waters, in the Indian Ocean and in the Arabian Sea? Will you be doing that? If yes, then I'm going to fix you. So this is how China is making things clear for itself right now, because it is an open secret that whatever India is doing, it is doing it on the behest of the United States of America with China and Pakistan. So now China is pushing India. And the moment it becomes clear to China, China will stop pushing India. And then India would be an ally of China. And then, so this is how I see it, that this will not escalate into a full-fledged war between India and China, but India will be pushed to the limits that India would come up clear and tell Chinese that I will not be doing any kind of activities in the bordering area of China and Pakistan because of CPEC Pakistan. Otherwise, there is no point of Pakistan, but because CPEC is going through these areas. So I will not be doing any hostile acts which is detrimental to the economic interest of China through CPEC. Number one. Number two, I'll be not bothering you in the Arabian Sea and in the Indian Ocean. So if these issues are clarified between India and China, then the conflict between India and China would be resolved, and China would not go back from this area. Whatever it has captured, it has captured. It might proceed a bit more to make itself secure, because it would definitely not only it would not prefer to believe on the words of the Indian politicians. It would ensure that it's present in those areas, and it will also ensure that India does not have any problem with its presence. You know what I mean, right? Like superpowers say, okay, I have pressed you, and you should pose that you are happy with this posture of mine because I'm a superpower. So you do not have the right to complain about it. You just try to live with it, and India will ultimately come to the conclusion that she has to live with it, right? So this is my analysis. You can differ with me. It's not a big deal. Okay, then Margentho, he says that diplomacy is the most primary means of achieving your national interest. So diplomacy, there is no denial of the fact that it is. He was right. The second point, or the second method which is employed by the international actors to achieve those means is the propaganda. So propaganda, what is a propaganda? First of all, I need to talk about the terminology, to explain this terminology of propaganda to you. It is the art of salesmanship, like you are selling someone to someone, you are propagating it. This is a good thing, this is a good thing, you need to buy it, this will serve your interest, this is this and this is that. So this is basically we call propaganda, right? Like for example, it will be clarified otherwise. If I go into examples, I can see the time is almost 55 minutes from the start of this video right now, and so I should not be going into further examples. I'll try to restrict myself to to the core content, not to the examples. So it is the art of convincing others about the justness of the goal and the objectives or the end which are desired to be secured. So the states, through the propaganda, they convince others that this is our national interest and this is a just national interest, this is our national goal, or this is the goal of the foreign policy, and we are justified to achieve this goal. So please cooperate with us, do whatever we are asking you to do. Like for example, Pakistan, if Pakistan is convincing the G20 countries that this is the national interest of Pakistan to give waiver in the repayment of the loans to Pakistan. So this is, Pakistan has articulated its case in a very professional manner, and that is why they have accepted to the demands of Pakistan. And then the chief executive of Pakistan, the Prime Minister, he kind of involved himself in this propaganda technique. Like he appeared on the media once, then he appeared on the media again, and initially a domestic audience were not convinced that what he's doing, what he's up to, but then later on the international community heard him, they responded to his thing, and it was because of the propaganda technique which was adopted. He justified the goals of the national interest of Pakistan in such a manner that the G20 countries, they agreed to the demands of the Pakistan, and not only for Pakistan but for the rest of the developing countries or underdeveloped countries, for which the chief executive of Pakistan had spoken about a month or 2 months ago, after the breakout of this pandemic. So this is how propaganda works. Then propaganda is, in other words, propaganda is a systematic attempt to affect the minds, emotions and actions of a given group of a specific public, right? Of a given group or a specific public, and for a specific purpose as well. So you do have got this specific purpose in your mind, then you are applying, you are making systematic attempt to appeal to the emotions of the people, and then you are involved in some kinds of acts to appeal to the emotions of people, and the leaders as well abroad, and then they would think that okay, these demands are quite justified, and these are quite justified goals, and we need to give them whatever they want to do, as I have given you the example of Pakistan. Then again, it is directly addressed to the people of other states, and its aim is always to secure the self-interest. So propaganda is not like, like I've talked about the stance of the government of Pakistan on this loan deferment. What was the need to come on public media, on state media, and then everybody was watching the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and what was the need to use his Twitter account, of which there are more than I guess, I don't know the exact amount right now, but more than 10 million people, 10 million followers are there, or maybe more than that now. So what is the need to put these kind of things on your Twitter, and what is the need to come to the national media and then make a speech, a brief speech in the English language? What is the need? Why not in Urdu? Because the target audience was the international community, and not the international leaders, but the public of the international community, the public of different nations, so that voices from within those states also emerge in favor of the underdeveloped and the developing countries, so that the leadership of those states, they are compelled so that they accept these demands. So this was a propaganda technique which he employed, the chief executive of Pakistan employed, and it worked. Initially, people in Pakistan were quite confused about it. His opponents were laughing at him for appearing in a tracksuit on the national media and appealing to the international audience, and the zealots, his sympathizers or his followers, the zealots, they were quite full of admiration for him. But now, after a few months, we see the dividends or the fruit of that speech in English, and he could communicate that thing privately to the leaders of those countries on a telephone call. But he did not do that. First of all, he appeared on the TV to spread the word on a wider scale and make a ground for it. And then after a few weeks, when that ground was made, then the formal appeal and everything was made. So this is how these propaganda techniques are working. They work in this fashion. Then recently, you can see this, the world has been converted into a global village now, because of the communication revolution, particularly the internet. So due to this, the propaganda techniques now work more efficiently, because you do not need to appear on television if you are trying to propagate something. You just put it on your Twitter, try to make a social media campaign from your Twitter account, and that campaign will gather momentum with the passage of time. So people will tweet, and then the hashtag and the trend will be made, and you can see it on daily basis on Twitter. How these things are done now. The trends are made and remade, and counter trends are also made. So these propagandas, they are with the advent of this revolutionary technology and internet, and then the advent of social media. Now propaganda is quite an easy thing to be carried out. Okay, then economic means are also employed. There are rich countries in the world, and then there are underdeveloped or developing countries in the world, and these underdeveloped and developing countries, they are always in need of economic aid. So the rich countries, by manipulating the international financial institutions and by providing the economic aid like the carrot to the poor countries, these economic means are used, and if the interest of the rich countries are not served, then the financial sanctions are also put on the poor countries, the needy countries, so that these rich countries tell the needy countries that, okay, we will make you deprive of your national interest, because your national interest is definitely poverty alleviation, economic prosperity in your country. So we will deprive you of your national interest. So that is why you need to accept whatever we are telling you to accept, so that our national interest is served. In this manner, the economic means are employed by the great powers, and their national interest is served. So I do not need to go into further detail, because the time from the start of the lecture, it is almost 1 hour and 3 minutes right now. I can see it on the screen. So it is 1 hour and 3 minutes right now, and it is too much for me as well. You might be listening it very comfortably, but it is too much for me. And unfortunately, I don't have a glass of water right now with me. So otherwise, it would have been your bad luck had I been in the possession of a glass of water with me right now. Okay. Okay, then the fourth point is This economic interest is again with the advent of this globalization. The economic interests are quite vital for countries. Previously, it was the military interest and the security interest, but with this globalization, poor countries cannot simply survive. Their economies will be ruined because they need these modern means and technologies, and the consumer economy is there. Consumerism is being promoted in the world, and if you are not developing, if the technology is not coming to your country, then definitely this international currency is dollar, and you are importing from somewhere, and the flight of international currency or the flight of dollar is happening in your country. So the value of your rupee is falling down because the flight of dollar is happening, and you are importing. You cannot remain without a smartphone these days. You cannot remain without a laptop. You cannot remain without electricity. So if your technology is not developed, you will definitely be going for solar. Like in Afghanistan, there are many pockets in the remote areas of Pakistan where electricity is not there. People have opted for solar, for installation of solar systems at their homes. So where are these solar systems coming from? They are coming from the developed countries. Where are these mobile phones coming from? Coming from the developing countries. So you cannot remain in this age of globalization without these modern means, and definitely if you are not with good terms with these countries, with these developed countries, then they will put you under sanction, and they will not, so you will not become prosperous economically, and the flight of money for your country from your country will be a regular phenomenon. Your rupee or your currency will be depreciated, whatever the currency of that particular country is there, against the dollar. And when this is depreciated, since you are importing everything, so you will not be in a position to import things. And then so these economic, this is a very complex phenomenon, and I hope I have made my point. There is no time for me to go into detail right now in this complexity of this phenomenon. Then the fourth point is that the fourth means which is employed is the alliances and treaties. These alliances and treaties are concluded between two and more than two countries for a specific purpose, and alliances and treaties make it a legal obligation for all the parties, the signatory parties of those alliances and those treaties, like the members of those alliances and those treaties, to work for the promotion of the agreed or common interest. So all the countries a few countries think that it is in the interest of these countries to make an alliance against, let's say, a set of countries against a set of other countries. So they will make an alliance. These alliances are either military, and these alliances can be economic in nature, right? Like military, with the example of military I'll be giving you afterwards, but the example of the economic alliances, or like these free economic zones. The example of the economic alliance might be the European Union, the free market economy of the Europe, which was established after the Second World War to deal with the aftermaths of the after effects of the Second World War. So it was a kind of an economic, the European Common Market, and then it converted into a European Union. So this is the kind of alliance of the kind of an example of an economic alliance. And then the example of military alliance is NATO, CETO, and CENTO. What happens with that? It was a military alliance against the expansionist designs of the Soviet Union in all those countries who were the members of these alliances. So I do not need to go into detail what was NATO, what was CETO, which are the countries which are formulating these, because then it will be, it is not the domain of this lecture right now. In some other lectures, if I think that is pertinent to the discussion, then I will discuss that in my future lectures. But right now, I think that this is not the domain of it. And then a counter-military alliance to counter these NATO wars, the NATO, the CETO, the CENTO, a counter-military alliance was also established by, which was being led by the Soviet Union. All those alliances, NATO, CENTO, CETO, were led by the United States of America, just to stop. If you see it is like, a crescent around the Soviet Union, CATO, CENTO, and then NATO. So it is like a crescent around the Soviet Union. So then, in order to counter this, the expansionist moves, or the offensive moves by the United States of America, the Soviet Union also aligned small states with itself, and it made the Warsaw Pact, so that the United States of America is also stopped from encroaching on the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union, and vice versa. These NATO and CENTO was there to stop the encroachment of Soviet Union on these Europeans and Middle Eastern and the Southeast Asian countries. So it was like this. I hope this point has been cleared. Then the fifth point is the coercive measures. The role of the power in international relations is a recognized fact. We cannot deny that. Power is definitely used, and it is an unwritten law in the international intercourse that nations can use the force for securing their national interest. So no law is telling the nations that, okay, you should go about your national interest and use the force, but nations do it, and it is a convention on the international stage that might is right, and if your national interests are at stake, you can use force, but that force should not be an all-out war. It is just a coercive measure, right now, as the Chinese are doing. With India, you can call it a coercive measure, which the Chinese are doing. So it is an unwritten law, international law, right? It is there. Then international law also recognizes coercive means which are short of war, just short of war. So coercive means small scale skirmishes, whatever is happening at the line of control is kind of coercion by India and against Pakistan. It is also there, but it is short of the full-fledged war, because they do not want to wage a war on the Pakistani side of the line of control. But still, there are sporadic incidences, they happen, and but then they are managed. Somehow they are managed because of the aggressive postures by Pakistan and international community and this and that. So they are managed. So it is just short of war, and international law recognizes it, that if it is short of war, you can do it. You cannot go for a full-fledged war. Then intervention, non-intercourse, embargoes, boycott, reprisal, retortion, retaliation, severance of relations, all these things, they are examples of coercive measures. You resort to either intervention in another territory like the Chinese are doing, non-intercourse with other countries. You just do not want to indulge in any kind of economic activities with that particular country, and that particular country's economy is dependent on you. You do not want to give them military aid, but the military aid is the need of that particular country because it has got some conflict in the region with another country, and it is dependent on your military aid because it does not want the regional balance to be disrupted by the military advancement of its adversary, its regional adversary. So this non-intercourse comes in that as well. Then embargoes like sanctions, it is on Iran. You can see the example of Iran in this manner. Then boycott, you are boycotting some country, you do not want to buy things, like the trade war between China and the United States of America. When they boycotted, they banned a lot of companies, a lot of Chinese companies, and in response to that, the Chinese boycotted. So these are some of the examples of the coercive measures again. Then retortion, retaliation, and severance of relations. You just minimize your diplomatic missions, like India and Pakistan currently are doing it. They have reduced the level of diplomatic interaction with each other. So these all are examples of coercive measures, and these coercive measures are basically adopted. So one important thing is that war and aggression have been declared illegal means, but they still continue. They are illegal, but still might is right, so these means continue, and they shape the course of international relations in the current era as well. They are though illegal by international law, but violation, we can see the violation. Everywhere there are wars and conflicts. See the Middle East, see the North African countries, Just take the example of this, Central Asia, Afghanistan. So all these things are happening, though they are illegal. They should not be happening, but they are happening. So it is, again, the might is right kind of phenomenon. Then the nations fully realize the importance of peaceful means of conflict resolutions like negotiations, diplomacy, as the ideal method for promoting their national interest. But when it comes to war, then they go to war as well. They realize that these are important aspects of promotion of your national interest. But at times they feel that, okay, these methods are not working, so let's go to war. Then they go to war. So that is why they go to war at times, and they are engaged in diplomacy, but at the same time they are engaged in coercive activities, which is not war. But at one end they will be carrying out diplomatic activities with each other, and on the other hand they will be carrying out coercive activities on the border or on the fringes, on their physical interaction or their virtual interaction in the economic sphere. So they will be doing these coercive activities, which I have already explained. Then military power is again regarded one of the most important part of your national power, and it is your national power. If you have got a tremendous amount of national power, then you will be able to achieve your national interest, because again, as I've told you, might is right. So if this national power is there, you will be achieving your national interest. If the national power is, of which military power is one of the major part, is not there, then you will not be able to achieve your national interest. So this carrot and stick policy, like from the one side you are showing the stick, and on the other hand, if you are an economic power as well, then you are having a carrot in your hand. So you are basically convincing, okay, this is a carrot, take it. Okay, if that particular country does not want to take the carrot, then you hit it with the stick, like the military power, mildly, so it will move forward and take the carrot like this. So convincing is there. So I hope this point has also been made clear. Whatever the means which I have elaborated, diplomacy, propaganda, coercive means and whatnot. So whatever these means which I have elaborated above in the previous few minutes, these are quite important means to achieve, or they are adopted to achieve your national interest. Nations have the right and duty to secure the national interest, and they have the freedom to choose any of this requisite means, right? Whatever means they want to adopt, they have this right, either to go to coercive measures, either to go to propaganda, to go to resort to the means of diplomacy. They have this right to adopt all those means. So this is the nation's right. They can use either peaceful means and they can use the coercive means. But one thing is very vital, that they should try to align their national interest with the international peace. Like their actions should not be putting the international peace at stake. The international peace should not be jeopardized. So it should not be jeopardized, and it should be taken care of. So that is why you see that limited wars are there, like between India and Pakistan. This conflict over Kashmir, it is there since 1947-48, it is there. But still that is a limited thing. It does not, India does not escalate situation to the level where it can become a threat to the international peace. And how it will become a threat to the international peace? Because, both these countries are nuclear states. So if India compel Pakistan, pushes Pakistan to the wall, Pakistan will have to retaliate. And Pakistan, since Pakistan is a weak state in the deterrence, Pakistan has got this nuclear deterrence, so Pakistan will resort to using the nuclear weapons against India. And if Pakistan used nuclear weapons against India, India will use it against Pakistan, so it will be a complete annihilation, and no country wants that this international. And then there will be, I'm just hypothetically talking about it, then China will come to the rescue of Pakistan, and the United States of America will come to the rescue of India, and it will be converted into a full-scale war. So the international, and then both those countries are also nuclear power countries. They have got nuclear capabilities. So it will be, the international peace will be jeopardized, and the whole international community will be at risk. So that is why situation is always brought under control. Whenever there is a risk of escalation, it is brought under control by the good offices of different countries. So again, by taking care of the international peace, it is the responsibility of the countries to formulate the goals and objectives of their foreign policy, and to devise their national interest or redefine their national interest in such a manner so that when they go after achieving these national interests, they do not jeopardize the international peace and harmony. So this is basically quite vital for the security and the sustainable development of the humankind, and the international community as well. So that is why very much important, and I think that we do not need to go into further detail. I hope I have made my point clear. If there is some problem, I can address that in your coming class, which will be specifically for this lecture, and I hope you all will be taking notes out of my lectures. And for general audience who are trying to attempt in the competitive examinations, these series of lectures are very helpful for them as well. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, press the subscribe button and press the bell, select all notification option in that, so that you receive my regular vlogs and lectures notifications as well. Thank you very much for watching. Inshallah, see you in the next vlog. Take care. Allah Hafiz.